This boarding pass seems fake." The word fake clung to Naomi, a black woman standing calmly in the first-class lane as nearby passengers subtly exchanged glances. The suspicion spread like wildfire, quiet, unspoken, but unmistakably present. "Please step aside, ma'am," instructed Kelly Morris, a gate agent for Sky Connect Airlines. Her tone suggested more than routine protocol. It hinted at wrongdoing. "Is there something wrong with my ticket?" Naomi asked evenly. No edge in her voice, no frustration. Just a simple question. "We just need to verify it," Kelly replied, her voice feigning politeness, but her body language betrayed skepticism. She tapped dramatically on her keyboard, examining the boarding pass as if it had been smuggled in from another country. She scrutinized Naomi as if she'd uncovered something illicit, not a woman holding a legitimate first-class ticket. A few seconds later, the tension in the cabin escalated dramatically. Captain Heather Langford entered the gate area in full uniform, her presence immediately commanding attention. Without a word, she stormed toward Naomi and, in one swift motion, struck her across the face. The crack of the slap echoed like thunder through the stunned silence of the terminal. Passengers froze, phones tilted, eyes widened. Would you like to know what led to this violent moment? What exposed a hidden but thriving system of power and prejudice in plain sight? This story is about what happens when a woman, treated as invisible and disrespected because of the color of her skin, reveals who she really is. If you believe in standing up to injustice, comment "Justice" for Naomi and subscribe for more stories that uncover truth and fight bias. It all began earlier that morning. For over 20 years, Commander Naomi Grant had started her day at 4:30 a.m. sharp, her alarm ringing with discipline earned from a lifetime in service. But today, she wasn't heading into her precinct or donning a uniform. Today, she was flying to Lakeshore City for the National Law Enforcement Leadership Conference. Just one day without the badge, she whispered to herself, sliding open her closet doors. She paused in front of her wardrobe longer than usual. No uniform, no medals, no polished shoes today. Just jeans, a sweater, and the quiet luxury of anonymity. She checked her phone again, rereading the travel notification she received the night before. "Congratulations, your first-class ticket is ready." A small smile crossed her face. She tucked her chief of police badge inside the hidden pocket of her carry-on. "I won't be needing this today," she murmured. She had no idea how wrong she was. Across the city, inside Sky Connect's pilot briefing room, Captain Heather Langford stood at the head of a long glass table, reviewing documents with a group of uniformed staff. Her presence was calculated, every detail of her appearance controlled. "We've noticed a trend lately," she said to her lead flight attendant, Dana Brooks, in a hushed tone. "Too many people making their way into first class who clearly don't belong there." Dana responded with a knowing nod. "Don't worry, Captain. I know exactly how to handle those types when they try to act like they're one of us." Heather smoothed the front of her jacket and offered a tight-lipped smile. "That's why I hand-picked you for today's flight. First class isn't just about the perks. It's about maintaining a certain atmosphere." Their laughter rang out across the sterile room. Around them, a few junior crew members exchanged glances. No one dared challenge what they heard, but some, deep down, knew something wasn't right. Flight 267 to Lakeshore City would be unlike any they'd worked before. Later that morning, Redwood Regional Airport buzzed with energy. Travelers hurried through security checkpoints, rolled luggage clattering on tile, announcements echoing overhead. For most, it was an ordinary Tuesday. But for Naomi Grant, this day would become one of the most documented instances of racial profiling in modern air travel history. While waiting near her gate, Naomi noticed a Latino family of 5, parents and 3 young children, struggling with a large digital map. Confusion and stress were painted across their faces as they tried to decipher the terminal layout in broken English. Without hesitation, Naomi stepped forward. She greeted them warmly in Spanish, a language she'd learned during her early years in community policing. Within seconds, their stress began to melt. She calmly walked them through the map, pointed out their gate, and even offered a shortcut to avoid delays. The mother grabbed Naomi's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude, and for a brief moment, Naomi was reminded why she had devoted her life to public service: to guide others through systems never designed with them in mind. Unbeknownst to her, Captain Langford had just entered the terminal and caught the tail end of the exchange. With her pilot's cap tucked beneath her arm and a polished uniform gleaming under the fluorescent lights, Heather paused. Her eyes narrowed. "Hey, when you're done," she barked in Naomi's direction, assuming she was airport staff, "clean up that spill by the lounge. It's been there forever." She didn't wait for a response. Naomi slowly turned, meeting Heather's eyes. "I'm a passenger," she stated simply, not angry, just correcting the mistake with grace. Heather didn't apologize. Instead, her expression tightened. "You all look the same in this terminal," she muttered under her breath, loud enough to be heard. The family Naomi had helped stood frozen in quiet horror. Naomi simply inhaled and exhaled. She had worn the badge long enough to know which battles to fight. This one wasn't over. Not yet. Recognition flickered across Naomi's face. "I'm a traveler," she said quietly, her voice steady, "not staff." There was no anger in her tone, no defensiveness, just a simple, factual correction. Captain Heather Langford didn't flinch. She didn't apologize or look embarrassed. Her lip curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You people all blend in around here," she muttered, just loud enough to carry over the hum of nearby conversations. The words lingered in the air like cigarette smoke, pungent, invasive, impossible to ignore. The father of the Latino family Naomi had helped earlier turned back toward her. His expression tightened. He didn't need a translation. He'd heard words like that before. Sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, always unforgettable. Naomi offered him a small nod. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself. 2 decades in law enforcement had taught her which conflicts to engage and which to store away for later. This one? Not yet. 15 minutes later, Naomi approached the security checkpoint. Around her, business travelers moved fluidly through the routine. Laptops out, belts off, shoes in bins. The rhythm of travel. Her own carry-on was neatly packed. 3 days' worth of clothing, toiletries, a folder of conference materials, and a snow globe for her daughter. The scanner flashed green. No alarms, no red lights. Still, "Step to the side, please," said a transportation officer, already reaching toward her luggage with gloved hands. His name tag read Eric Darnell. "Just a random check," he added, without making eye contact. Random. The word stuck in Naomi's mind like a burr. Random, as 3 white businessmen breezed through without a second glance. Random, as an older white couple was waved through with a smile. Random, as a teenage boy with wires spilling from his backpack walked by unbothered. The odds didn't feel random at all. Eric's hands moved roughly through her belongings, meticulously folded clothes now jumbled, privacy scattered in plain sight. "What's this hard object?" he asked loudly, drawing attention from other passengers. Naomi kept her tone even. "My travel toiletry case. Through the transparent vinyl, anyone could see. Toothbrush, moisturizer, facial wipes, everyday items carried by millions." But the performance continued, playing to an audience that didn't ask questions. From the adjacent priority lane, Captain Langford stood with another pilot, arms folded. She didn't bother to whisper. "Security knows who to keep an eye on," she said with a smirk. Her colleague nodded silently. Agreement by omission. When nothing suspicious was found, Officer Darnell zipped up the bag hurriedly and handed it back. "You're free to go," he mumbled, still not looking at her. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a bureaucratic exit, quick and clinical, designed to move her along. But the damage had already been done. Langford had noted her face now. She wasn't just a blur in the crowd anymore. Something about Naomi unnerved her. Maybe it was the confidence. Maybe it was the calm. Whatever the reason, Naomi had become a target. At Gate C-14, boarding began for Sky Connect Flight 267 to Lakeshore City. The screen above the counter blinked on time. A small cluster of first-class passengers gathered in the priority lane. Sharp suits, monogrammed briefcases, easy smiles of those used to early boarding. Naomi joined the line, her boarding pass in hand. Gate agent Kelly Morris, wearing a sharp blazer and the silver wings of Sky Connect, looked up from her screen. She clocked Naomi, then glanced sideways at Captain Langford, now standing a few feet away pretending to check flight paperwork. There was no need for words. The message had already been passed. "Economy boarding doesn't start for another 45 minutes, Kelly announced loudly, her voice carrying across the gate area. A few nearby passengers turned to look. Naomi didn't react. Years of de-escalation training guided her. She placed the boarding pass gently on the counter. No sigh, no eye roll, just professionalism. Kelly picked up the pass as if it were evidence in a criminal case. She flipped it over, held it up to the light, squinted at it. A small theater of suspicion. Naomi didn't take the bait. She knew this game: provoke a reaction, then use it as justification for escalation. Kelly continued examining the ticket as if decoding a foreign language, drawing out the process with deliberate intention. All the while, 5 white passengers behind Naomi were checked in swiftly and with warm smiles. Kelly flipped the boarding pass again, held it up to the light, as if it were counterfeit currency. "This looks unusual," she said slowly, projecting doubt into the air like a scent meant to attract suspicion. Naomi kept her voice steady. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" No defensiveness, no raised voice, nothing that could be twisted into the stereotype so often weaponized against black passengers. Aggressive. "We'll need to take a closer look," Kelly said, gesturing for her to step aside, as if Naomi had attempted to smuggle something forbidden rather than board with a perfectly valid first-class pass. Her fingers danced across the keyboard in exaggerated performance, eyes flicking up at Naomi every few seconds, her skepticism barely concealed. As Naomi stood waiting, 5 white passengers approached the same counter behind her. Each received a warm smile and a quick scan of their documents. "Enjoy your flight," Kelly told one with a cheery tone. "No additional checks, no questions, no delay." To Naomi, the contrast wasn't just obvious, it was exhausting, but it was also familiar. Too familiar. From her vantage point near the jet bridge, Captain Heather Langford observed the entire interaction. She gave the faintest nod of approval. her gaze approving Kelly's performance like a director watching a well-rehearsed scene unfold. This was no spontaneous mishap. This was choreography, and Kelly was performing for the only audience that mattered, her captain. The charade escalated when Kelly called out, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I believe we may have a fraudulent ticket here." The word fraudulent clung to Naomi like static, sticking to her in the minds of watching strangers. People shifted in their seats, glanced over their phones, watching the scene unfold like live theater. Soon, Wesley Tran, the gate supervisor, arrived. He carried the demeanor of someone who'd seen this dance before, too many times. He walked over, tapped through the system with efficiency that betrayed long experience. After just a few keystrokes, he turned the screen toward Kelly. First class, seat 2A, purchased 3 weeks ago, platinum member. Kelly's face didn't hide her disappointment. She looked up at him, unconvinced. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It just doesn't seem right." The implication was loud and clear. Some people don't look like they belong in first class. That's when Captain Langford entered the scene, performing a display of concern. "Is there an issue with boarding?" she asked, as if she hadn't been standing nearby, eavesdropping the entire time. In uniform, Langford was the ultimate authority on board. Her word wasn't just final, it was policy. "She says she has a first-class ticket," Kelly said, carefully emphasizing she in a way that stripped the humanity from Naomi. She didn't say, "this passenger." She said, "this woman," and everyone who had heard language weaponized before caught the difference. Without asking, Captain Langford took the boarding pass from Wesley's hand. "And how did you afford this?" she demanded, waving the ticket slightly. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in politeness. The assumption behind it, clear and cutting, was that Naomi didn't look like someone who should be sitting in first class. Naomi answered calmly, "I paid for it, with my money." Then, almost as an afterthought, but not really, she added, "Not that it should matter." The first crack in her patience had formed, subtle but visible. "We'll need to verify your method of payment," Langford said flatly. "Fraud is common." She made sure to land on the word fraud, giving it weight, letting it linger in the air just long enough for nearby passengers to absorb and attach it to Naomi. But everyone watching knew what this really was: selective enforcement, unequal treatment, bias in plain sight. Wesley shifted uncomfortably, caught between doing what was right and obeying the chain of command. "Captain," he said gently, "her booking is confirmed in our system. I'm responsible for flight security," Langford replied, each word heavy with self-righteousness. "I want it checked again. Not a request, a directive." Another 10 minutes passed. 10 minutes of delay. 10 minutes of being treated like a suspect instead of a passenger. 10 minutes of quiet, manufactured shame. All while other travelers continued to board, bypassing Naomi, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge what they were seeing. Some peeked over their shoulders with cautious sympathy. Others avoided looking altogether. But everyone knew. Another call to SkyConnect's customer service line. Another layer of verification. Naomi Grant's identity, her platinum status, her confirmed first-class ticket, all validated. Again, every requirement satisfied. Still, she stood, waiting, dignity intact, not because the system respected her, but because she refused to let it break her. Eventually, the gate agent gave a curt nod. "You're cleared to board." Naomi stepped forward, boarding pass in hand, walking the narrow jet bridge toward Flight 267. Behind her, she could feel Captain Heather Langford's presence. Close, watching, unrelenting. The conflict wasn't over. It had simply changed locations. The jet bridge was tight, dim, and semi-private. No crowd now. No customer service reps. Just the echo of footsteps and metal walls. Perfect for escalation. Moments before they reached the aircraft door, Langford struck. "This bag is oversized," she announced suddenly, grabbing Naomi's carry-on without warning. The same carry-on Naomi had used on nearly 90 flights over 3 years. Never once flagged, never once questioned. "Please don't touch my personal belongings," Naomi said calmly, her tone firm but respectful. A boundary set, not shouted. But this was the third time Naomi had corrected the captain. First in the terminal, then at the gate. Now again, and in Captain Langford's world, being challenged, especially by someone she deemed beneath her, was intolerable. So she responded not with words, but with force. She yanked the bag violently, causing it to fly open. Its contents spilled across the jet bridge floor. Folded clothes scattered, a folder of conference materials sliding beneath a bench, a toiletry case flipped upside down. A small glass snow globe, carefully wrapped in a cloth, rolled slowly toward the edge of the walkway. Langford's eyes narrowed. "What are you hiding in here?" she barked, kicking the toiletry bag aside with the toe of her polished shoe. There was nothing suspicious. The bag had passed security. It had been cleared. But humiliation, not safety, was the goal here. Power used not to protect, but to belittle. Naomi said nothing. She knelt to retrieve her things with quiet grace, aware now that several passengers were watching, and some had begun to record with their phones. That's when Captain Langford shifted tactics. "You're being aggressive," she declared loudly, loud enough for others to hear. It was a script Naomi had seen play out time and time again. The calm, black woman, falsely portrayed as the threat. The authority figure, escalating, and then claiming to be the victim. Naomi's years of experience in law enforcement told her exactly what was happening. But she didn't react. She simply continued picking up her items. The snow globe, thankfully, had stopped just inches from the edge. Her papers were no longer organized. Her privacy had been shattered. But her dignity, still there, still hers. She zipped the bag and stood slowly. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," Naomi said, her voice low but assured. She knew those words would carry little weight. Not in a system that protected uniforms more than people. But she said them anyway, because someone needed to. By the time she stepped onto the plane, Naomi's shoulders dropped slightly, not from defeat, but from exhaustion. Seat 2A, window seat, first row, a small corner of the world that, on paper, belonged to her. She sat down. Instead of placing her bag overhead, she slid it under the seat in front of her. Closer, safer, no longer trusting it out of sight. She reached into the bag, unwrapped the snow globe for her daughter, and held it for a moment. Unbroken, still whole. Then, gently, she wrapped it again and tucked it deep inside. Around her, the familiar motions of flight prep unfolded. Passengers in seats 1C, 1D, and 2B, all white, all in suits, received warm greetings, drink menus, and cloth napkins from Dana Brooks, the lead flight attendant. Dana's eyes skipped over Naomi's seat as if it were empty. Once, then twice, then a third time. It wasn't oversight, it was erasure. The man in 2B was already sipping his second scotch. Naomi hadn't been offered so much as a glass of water. "Excuse me," Naomi said gently as Dana Brooks passed her row for the fourth time. Her tone remained measured, professional. "Could I please have a bottle of water?" Dana didn't slow, didn't turn her head, didn't even flinch. She moved down the aisle as if the voice had never existed. Not seconds later, she answered a question from seat 3B, her response warm and prompt. Naomi watched with quiet clarity, the same clarity she'd once brought to countless discrimination investigations. Except this time, the target wasn't someone in a report. It was her. 5 more minutes passed. Dana handed out hot towels, skipping 2A, took beverage orders, skipping 2A, offered reading materials, again skipping 2A. The message rang loud and clear. "You're not welcome here. You don't belong. You don't matter." Naomi pressed the call button above her seat, the universally understood request for assistance. Dana appeared within seconds, only to reach up and silently deactivate the light. She didn't say a word, didn't look at Naomi, just walked away. The man in 2B, middle-aged and wrapped in a tailored suit, had been quietly observing. His discomfort had grown with each deliberate omission. "Excuse me," he said, stopping Dana as she offered him a second hot towel. "The woman beside me has asked for water, more than once. Could you help her, please?" Dana's smile sharpened ever so slightly, but her voice remained smooth. "I'll get to her when I can," she said. Her tone left no doubt. If she got to Naomi, it would be on her own time, if ever. What Naomi had experienced so far, delays, inspections, and now denial of basic service, wasn't chaotic or impulsive. It was systematic. Each dismissal, each ignored request, each act of calculated neglect reinforced a single, quiet command: disappear. Naomi pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and began recording. She didn't know what she'd do with the information yet, but her instincts, sharpened by 2 decades in law enforcement, told her to preserve every detail. Timestamp, names, reactions. Truth was harder to deny when you had a record. Her documentation was interrupted by movement at the front of the cabin. Captain Heather Langford had entered. She made a slow, deliberate scan of the first-class section. Her gaze paused, locked on Naomi. Then she began walking. This was no routine check. Naomi had flown hundreds of times and had never seen a captain do a personal pre-flight inspection of passengers. No, this was a continuation. The same confrontation. A new setting. Langford stopped directly beside seat 2A. "There must be some mistake," she announced, her voice projected loud enough for every row to hear. She didn't speak to Naomi, but around her, like she was a clerical error to be addressed. Naomi didn't flinch. "There's no mistake," she replied calmly. "This is my assigned seat." She held up the boarding pass, a fact in her hand. Langford's tone shifted, lost all professionalism. "People like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft." The words struck harder than any turbulence. Every passenger within earshot stiffened. One woman gasped. The businessman beside Naomi went still. A couple in row 3 glanced at each other, wide-eyed. In an age where careers unraveled with a single clip, Langford's words didn't just sting, they shocked. The mask had slipped. What had been coded now became clear. Naomi's face remained composed, but her next question cut deeper than any accusation. "What exactly do you mean by people like me?" It was a trap, and both women knew it. There was no clean way out. No way to explain that phrase without revealing its truth. Langford didn't back down. You know exactly what I mean. And now, so did everyone else. You're out of place here. The words hung heavy in the air, centuries of exclusion condensed into a single sentence. Who gets to belong? Who gets to decide? What happens to those who dare to cross boundaries not marked by signs, but by skin? Even the ambient rustle of boarding, seat belts clicking, bags shifting, seemed to vanish. Now, every eye in the first-class cabin was fixed on the unfolding drama. A decorated black woman, seated with a paid ticket, being confronted by a white captain in uniform. The power dynamic was unmistakable. One held authority. The other was being told she didn't deserve to exist in that space. But Naomi Grant knew exactly what this was, and she knew how stories like these were often rewritten, twisted until the victim became the problem. So, without a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Not to go viral, not to sue, but to document, to make sure the moment couldn't be erased, rewritten, or explained away later. Before she could even open the camera app, Dana Brooks appeared. Suddenly, swiftly, and with a sense of urgency Naomi had never seen when water had been requested. No recordings allowed during safety checks, Dana barked, stepping between Naomi and her phone. The timing was too precise to be spontaneous. Naomi saw it immediately. One played aggressor, the other blocked the evidence. A practiced routine. But it was already too late. Passengers in 1D, 3A, and 4C had already begun filming, quietly but clearly. What had started as bias was now public spectacle. Witnesses were everywhere, and digital eyes were rolling. Captain Heather Langford felt the shift, the loss of control. Her voice snapped sharp as she leaned in, finger thrust toward Naomi's face, so close that Naomi could feel the air move. "You're being disruptive," Langford accused, voice vibrating with frustration. It was absurd. Naomi hadn't stood, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even left her seat. "I'm sitting quietly in my assigned seat," she responded, her tone calm, measured, professional, as always. Her hands remained on the armrests, fingers splayed, palms visible. Years of de-escalation training had taught her how to make herself appear non-threatening. Everything about her screamed control, but Captain Langford wasn't interested in truth. "Your tone and body language are threatening," she claimed, manufacturing a narrative that existed only in her own perception. A tactic all too familiar to Naomi, and to anyone who had ever seen power twist reality. Interpret composure as defiance. Interpret confidence as aggression. The man in seat 2B, still silently witnessing the entire ordeal, finally spoke up. "She hasn't moved or raised her voice," he said firmly, looking Langford in the eye. Langford turned on him instantly. "Stay out of this," she snapped, the veneer of professionalism cracking further. "She's creating a hostile environment." But the irony was too thick to miss. The only hostility was radiating from the captain herself. Naomi didn't flinch. "The only aggression here," she said quietly, "is coming from you and your crew." That truth, spoken plainly, tipped Langford over the edge. "That's it," she hissed, color rising in her cheeks. "Dana, call security. Get her off my plane." Dana moved with speed, flawless when it came to removing passengers, not serving them. She lifted the cabin intercom and delivered the message with crisp efficiency. "Security to first class. Disruptive passenger in 2A." The words echoed through the fuselage like a verdict. A quiet woman with a valid ticket had now been transformed into a potential threat. A seat into a stage. A passenger into a profile. 3 minutes passed. No one spoke. Naomi remained still, her hands exactly where they had been, visible, calm, deliberate. Langford hovered like a sentry, her presence pulsing with unearned authority. Around them, smartphones continued to record, every moment documented, every action preserved. When the 2 airport security officers arrived at the cabin door, their expressions were unreadable. But something in their eyes said they already sensed the truth before the first word was spoken. They scanned the scene. No shouting, no resistance, just a black woman sitting quietly in her seat, and a captain, visibly agitated, standing over her like a warden. Langford pointed immediately. "Remove her. She's threatening my crew," Captain Heather Langford shouted, pointing squarely at Naomi Grant. The accusation rang out across the first-class cabin, loud, urgent, and completely false. To anyone paying attention, the contrast between Langford's hysteria and Naomi's composed stillness was stark. The security officers, now standing just inside the aircraft door, looked around, confused. They saw no aggression, no threat, just a black woman sitting quietly in her seat, surrounded by watching passengers and recording phones. "I've done nothing wrong," Naomi said softly. "This is racial profiling." The words were unflinching, direct, honest, naming the very thing unfolding in real time. "There she goes, playing the race card," Langford sneered, her voice rising into a near shout. The phrase, meant to silence, revealed everything: her prejudice, her defensiveness, her fear of accountability. It was a confession wrapped in contempt. The 2 officers glanced at each other again. Their training told them something was very wrong here. Naomi, moving with slow, intentional care, reached toward her jacket pocket. "Perhaps this will clear things up," she said gently. Her movement was calm, transparent. Nothing rushed, nothing concealed. But Langford reacted as if Naomi had drawn a weapon. With no warning, no reason, she slapped Naomi across the face. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. "She's reaching for a weapon," Langford screamed. But it wasn't true. She hit first and justified it second. Time fractured. Passengers froze in disbelief. Security stiffened, stunned. Even Dana Brooks, the flight attendant, clapped a hand over her mouth, recognizing too late that a line had been crossed. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't rise. She simply completed the motion Langford had tried to stop. From her pocket, she pulled a badge. Not a wallet, not a weapon, a gold shield. Not just any badge, but one that demanded recognition the moment it caught the light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The badge spoke for her. 1 second. 2. 3. The realization crashed into the room like a wave. The senior security officer stepped forward, voice cracking slightly as the weight of truth settled in. "Chief Grant," he said, stunned. "Chief Naomi Grant of the Eastvale Metropolitan Police?" His body language shifted instantly, shoulders straightening in instinctive respect. Authority recognized authority. Captain Langford's color drained as fast as her credibility. The hand that had struck Naomi trembled. All her control, all her power, vanished in an instant. She had assaulted the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the region, and she had done it in front of 24 witnesses and a half-dozen cameras. The security officer unclipped his radio. No more hesitation. "This is Officer Ramirez requesting backup and arrest support at Gate C-14, he said into the mic, his tone crisp and official. "Captain Heather Langford is being detained for assaulting Chief Naomi Grant." One sentence changed everything. In that moment, the power structure inverted. The woman who had been targeted, ignored, and accused now held more authority than anyone else on the aircraft, and the woman who had commanded unquestioned respect for 2 decades, she was now the subject of a criminal investigation. Time seemed to stop. 23 seconds passed. Not a single passenger spoke. The only sound came from the ventilation system and the faint boarding announcements echoing from the terminal, oblivious to the upheaval playing out in first class. Langford stood frozen, backed against the bulkhead wall. The same hand she'd used to strike Naomi still hovered in the air, trembling, empty. Her expression, pale, hollow, almost ghost-like. 20 years of unchecked power, 20 years of unquestioned authority, collapsed in one irreversible instant. It was a moment that could never be undone. Officer Robert Diaz, a 15-year veteran of airport security, stepped forward. Though stunned, his training took over. In one fluid motion, he unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. His voice rang out with formal clarity. "Captain Heather Langford, you are under arrest for assault." The words struck like a thunderclap. Langford blinked, frozen in disbelief. "You can't do this," she cried, her voice rising with outrage. "I'm the captain." She said it like it was a shield, like a title could protect her from accountability. But this time, it didn't. Officer Diaz circled behind her and secured one cuff with a metallic click that echoed through the stunned silence of the cabin. "You struck a police chief," he said matter-of-factly, in front of nearly 200 witnesses and multiple cameras. The second cuff locked into place. Authority transferred. Power reclaimed. Your rank doesn't place you above the law. Langford's face began to change. The reality she'd denied until now hit her like a wall. She struggled in the cuffs, clumsy and desperate. Her usual commanding presence now looked awkward, almost pitiful. "This is a mistake." She was reaching, but the sentence died as she realized how empty it sounded. Too many eyes, too many recordings, too much truth. Dana Brooks, the flight attendant who'd played her part in the harassment, finally moved, rushing toward the officers with urgency. But her face held panic, not righteousness. "There's been some kind of misunderstanding," she stammered. The captain was following security protocol. Before she could finish, the second officer, Officer Sarah Lynn, newer but sharp, stepped forward. "Step back," she said firmly, "or you'll be detained for obstruction." Dana froze. Officer Lynn's hand hovered near her own handcuffs, not as a threat, but as a clear warning. "We already have multiple passenger statements documenting your coordinated harassment of Chief Grant." Dana looked between Naomi and the officers, her internal conflict written all over her face. Finally, she stepped aside. Self-preservation had won. She opened her mouth, maybe to offer an apology, but the moment had passed. The damage was done. The reckoning had begun. The noise had rippled past first class. Through the curtain separating the cabins, economy passengers were filming, whispering, capturing what had once been unspeakable. The captain slapped a passenger. "The passenger is a police chief. They're arresting the captain." By the time Ethan Wallace, the station manager for SkyConnect Airlines, arrived breathless at gate C-14, chaos had reached corporate. He had received 3 red flag alerts in under a minute. Captain under arrest. High-profile passenger assaulted. Departure delayed. Now he stood at the aircraft door trying to piece together the wreckage. "Chief Grant," he said, approaching Naomi like she was a live wire. I'm deeply sorry. I can't begin to express." His words stumbled under the weight of the moment. There was no script for this, no handbook for apologizing to a police chief after your captain slapped her. Naomi hadn't left seat 2A, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lashed out. But she had made one thing crystal clear. "I want every piece of security footage preserved," she said. Her voice was firm, not raised, but it carried the weight of someone used to giving lawful orders. "This isn't a request. It's an official directive." "Understood," Ethan replied quickly, already tapping furiously on his tablet. From the terminal, the jet bridge, the cabin, every angle. He didn't question her. He knew how fast evidence could vanish when powerful institutions were at risk. But before he could say more, his tablet buzzed. An emergency call. The screen lit up with CEO Emergency Protocol in bold red letters. The incident had officially escalated beyond the terminal. Within 90 seconds of Captain Heather Langford's arrest, the situation had exploded far beyond Gate C-14. The corporate machine that usually shielded frontline staff from accountability had shifted gears, now operating at breakneck speed to protect the airline's brand from collapse. Ethan Wallace, station manager for Sky Connect Airlines, turned his tablet to show Naomi Grant a live video feed. The airline's CEO, Miles Harrison, appeared on screen. His expression grave, his tone carefully measured. Representing a $4 billion company now trending for all the wrong reasons, Harrison didn't waste time. "Chief Grant," he began, skipping pleasantries, "on behalf of Sky Connect, I want to offer my personal apology for the appalling treatment you received. I assure you, Captain Langford's behavior does not reflect our company's values. It was polished, polite, possibly reviewed by legal counsel just moments earlier. But it rang hollow, because the truth was already out there, circulating through social media, stitched into clips, captioned in outrage. Langford's actions hadn't happened in isolation. They were part of a pattern, coordinated, calculated, and backed by multiple members of her team, and that reality came into sharper focus seconds later. 2 airline supervisors stepped into the cabin, uniforms crisp, faces serious. They approached Dana Brooks without ceremony. Flight attendant Brooks, one of them said loud enough for passengers to hear, "Your employment with Sky Connect Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Please surrender your credentials and exit the aircraft." There was no meeting, no union rep, no delay, just swift damage control. Dana's expression cracked. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. As she was escorted down the aisle, at least 27 passengers documented the moment on their phones. Her career ended in the very aisle where she had chosen silence and complicity, and through the still-open cabin door, another figure came into view. Kelly Morris, the gate agent who had attempted to humiliate Naomi before boarding. She was now surrounded by Sky Connect security personnel. Her face shifted from confusion to stunned disbelief as one reached up and removed her badge. 3 minutes later, a new agent stood at the boarding podium. The airline's containment protocol had kicked into overdrive. A replacement captain, summoned from the crew lounge, hurried down the jet bridge, followed by an entirely new flight crew. The message was clear. Everyone who had interacted with Chief Naomi Grant was being pulled. No half measures, no internal memos, just mass replacement. Despite no in-flight Wi-Fi, word had already spread. Passengers were airdropping videos to each other, compiling footage, preparing timelines. Justice wasn't just unfolding, it was being witnessed in real time. Captain Langford, still in uniform, was led through Redwood Regional Airport in handcuffs. What had once been her armor, her pristine airline uniform, was now a backdrop for disgrace. Cameras from nearby media, originally stationed for a routine travel story, swung around to capture the moment. It would lead every evening newscast before the day was over. As the echoes of footsteps faded, a new announcement rang out over the airport's PA system. All SkyConnect staff are to report for immediate, mandatory bias training. This is not optional. The announcement wasn't just policy. It was a public admission. The airline, once insulated by layers of procedure, now stood exposed. Meanwhile, across town, inside a quiet room at Eastvale Metropolitan Police Headquarters, a heavy steel door closed behind Captain Heather Langford with a solid thud. Privilege paused. Her uniform had been exchanged for a detention jumpsuit, her surroundings stripped of rank, hierarchy, and influence. The sterile gray walls didn't care who she used to be. Back at HQ, another room had been prepared for witness statements. There, seated with quiet authority, Chief Naomi Grant began to give her formal account. Her report was methodical, precise, not emotional, but devastating in its clarity. She didn't need to embellish. She had the facts, she had the timestamps, she had the videos, and she had the truth. The notes Naomi Grant had taken during the flight, time-stamped, factual, emotion-free, became the spine of an already overwhelming case. Her precision, her patience, her restraint, it all paid off. Meanwhile, in the booking area, a camera captured Captain Heather Langford's mugshot, a woman visibly unraveling. Her eyes, wide and glassy, her mouth slightly parted in disbelief. It was the look of someone facing real accountability for the first time in her life. The image would circulate on news platforms within hours, paired side by side with her confident airline headshot. A before and after of power, lost. Back at Redwood Regional, Chief Grant sat in a conference room reviewing the testimonies of fellow passengers gathered by officers on site. But what unfolded wasn't just a summary of that day. It was a pattern, a chain of events stretching through Captain Langford's past, hidden behind years of unchallenged authority. A black entrepreneur recalled being pulled aside months earlier, questioned about the legitimacy of his first-class seat. A Middle Eastern doctor had been removed from a flight because Langford claimed she felt uneasy around him. A Hispanic flight attendant, fluent in English, shared that she had been repeatedly reassigned off Langford's flights after complaints about her communication skills. One story became two. Two became a dozen. What once looked like a single abuse of power now stood exposed as systemic, protected, repeated, covered, until now. Within 3 hours of the incident, a representative from the Federal Aviation Bureau arrived at Eastvale Police Headquarters. Unusual speed for a federal agency. Their statement was clear. Captain Langford's pilot license was suspended, effective immediately, pending formal investigation, the kind of emergency suspension typically reserved for substance abuse or critical safety violations. That's how seriously it was being taken. As evening fell, Langford sat alone in a holding cell. Her arrest clothes replaced her uniform. Her surroundings, steel and concrete, offered no comfort. Across town, Chief Grant prepared to speak at a hastily arranged press conference. Online, the hashtag #OnFlyingWhileBlack had erupted, now the top trending topic worldwide. The story wasn't just viral, it was vindication for millions. People of color shared their own painful flight experiences, moments of suspicion, humiliation, removal, all validated now in the story of Seat 2A. A few days later, inside Courtroom 4B, former Captain Heather Langford appeared for sentencing. Gone was the posture of command. Gone was the smug smile. She sat in a Navy suit, noticeably thinner after her short pretrial detention. The courtroom was silent as Judge Elena Michaels, with 32 years of federal experience, removed her glasses. Those who knew her recognized the gesture. A signal. Something important was coming. "The defendant has pled guilty to all charges," Judge Michaels said, her voice strong but even. She continued. "Based on overwhelming video evidence and a plea agreement with prosecutors, this court sentences you to 6 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a lifetime ban from working in the aviation industry." A murmur passed through the courtroom. Then she added, "Your uniform once symbolized duty and responsibility, not immunity. You betrayed the trust of your employer, your passengers, and the public. And that betrayal carries consequences." Langford didn't argue. She didn't look up. She nodded just once, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the defendant's table. 73 floors above the city, in a sleek corporate office, SkyConnect Airlines' legal team signed the final paperwork on a $40 million class action settlement. The fund would compensate not only the passengers on Flight 267, but also other travelers whose experiences, once ignored, had surfaced after Naomi's story went public. Justice had arrived, not just for Naomi, but for everyone who'd been told in so many silent ways, "You don't belong here." The $40 million class action settlement reached by SkyConnect Airlines was just the beginning. It compensated not only the passengers on Flight 267, but also hundreds of travelers who came forward with their own stories, people who had once stayed silent, now emboldened by a woman in Seat 2A. But money wasn't the most important part. The settlement also included sweeping policy reforms designed to dismantle the system that allowed such discrimination to persist for so long. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, overhauled complaint procedures, a transparent incident tracking database for all claims related to profiling and unequal treatment, and, perhaps most notably, the permanent industry ban of Kelly Morris, the gate agent whose pattern of misconduct had only come to light during legal discovery, alongside 5 other staff members. Justice had arrived. But true accountability, Chief Naomi Grant insisted, meant nothing without systemic change. 6 months after the incident that reshaped the skies, Chief Grant stood before a joint task force on transportation equity, a gathering of federal regulators, airline executives, and civil rights advocates. This time, she wasn't wearing jeans or walking quietly through a terminal. She stood tall in her full Eastvale police uniform, stars on her shoulders reflecting the lights above the conference floor. Her voice was calm, her tone firm. "Punishment alone isn't the goal," she said. "The goal is transformation, creating a system where this doesn't just get punished, but becomes impossible." That message rippled outward. Airlines across the country adopted blind passenger processing systems, where seating upgrades and boarding tiers were determined strictly by objective data: loyalty status, travel history, purchase behavior. No more room for gate agents to judge who looked like they belonged. A new anonymous reporting tool, embedded in QR codes on boarding passes and seat backs, gave passengers direct access to internal oversight teams, no longer filtered through gatekeepers who might bury complaints. Reports surged 300% in the first month alone. Not because discrimination increased, but because for the first time, passengers believed their voices would be heard. One reform had perhaps the greatest impact of all: automated security footage preservation. Every time a discrimination report was filed, all linked footage, from the terminal to the jet bridge to the aircraft, was locked and backed up, preventing the technical errors that once caused crucial moments to conveniently disappear. Initially, airlines resisted. It was expensive, logistically difficult, but after 3 major carriers implemented it and saw discrimination claims drop by 70% in under 90 days, the rest followed. Why? Because behavior changes when accountability becomes inevitable. The industry itself began to shift. Sky Connect, like many others, launched a diverse leadership initiative, not for PR, but because they discovered that diverse leadership reduced complaints, increased passenger satisfaction, and improved team cohesion. What started as crisis control became competitive advantage, and in training rooms across the country, future pilots, flight attendants, and air traffic controllers watched a live stream of Chief Grant as she addressed a graduating class at Midwest Aviation Academy. Authority, she told them, must come with accountability. You'll be trusted with people's lives, dignity, and safety. Your uniform is not a shield. It's a promise. Never forget who you're there to serve. Among the audience sat a few familiar faces, former passengers from Flight 267. Some had since been hired as compliance officers, helping airlines strengthen their anti-discrimination protocols. Their lived experience had become institutional expertise. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were changemakers. And for them, diversity wasn't a checkbox. It was a mission. Meanwhile, in a very different room, Heather Langford, no longer captain, sat in a folding chair in a group session. She had begun the mandatory anti-bias program that once felt beneath her. Now, surrounded by other professionals who had abused authority, officers who profiled, teachers who punished unfairly, supervisors who silenced complaints, Langford began the first step in a hard journey, acknowledging harm. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. Heather Langford's journey didn't end in a courtroom. It continued quietly, through letters written by hand, reviewed by her counselor, and mailed with no expectation of forgiveness. Letters to Chief Naomi Grant, to passengers aboard Flight 267, to colleagues of color she had once ignored, dismissed, or derailed. In one of the first letters she wrote, "I didn't know I was discriminating. I thought I was maintaining standards, using judgment, doing my job. I didn't understand the difference between authority and power, that one is meant to protect others, the other to protect yourself. I can't undo what I've done, but I can own it, without excuse, without expectation. Some recipients never opened the envelopes. Some responded, firmly, clearly, with how her actions had harmed them. And a few, they wrote back, not to offer absolution, but to acknowledge that her path toward understanding might serve something greater than redemption. It might help others wake up before it's too late." Thousands of miles away, in a bright training room at Great Lakes Aeronautical University, a young woman sat in a simulator, preparing for her first solo flight. She was Naomi's daughter. Her inspiration hadn't come from the harassment her mother endured that day. It came from how her mother had responded, with calm, with strength, with truth. "My mom never told me I couldn't succeed in spaces where we weren't always welcome. She told a film crew documenting her milestone. She showed me how to transform those spaces. Recognizing the significance of Naomi's stand and the brand necessity of actual reform, SkyConnect Airlines integrated her story into its mandatory employee training. From ground staff to board members, all were required to complete a bias intervention course that included real footage from Flight 267 and expert commentary. The training focused not just on what went wrong, but on all the opportunities to intervene before things spiraled. How silence is complicity, how small actions compound into harm. 1 year later, passengers from Flight 267 gathered in a hotel near Redwood Regional Airport, not far from where their lives had first collided. What began as a reunion for a documentary crew turned into something much deeper, a moment of shared reflection. "I used to mind my own business," said the businessman from seat 2B. "If something didn't involve me, I stayed quiet. But now I understand that silence protects no one but the one doing harm." Others nodded. They, too, had changed. Some had become advocates in their workplaces. Others had spoken out in moments they once would have let pass. All had learned that systems don't change themselves. They're changed by people who refuse to look away. What began as a slap, a single act of cruelty, became a spark that lit an entire industry. Not because it was the most outrageous thing to happen, but because, for once, the consequences fit the offense. For once, the cameras were rolling. For once, the system didn't bury the truth. It elevated it. The truest measure of progress wasn't found in new policies, or even in multi-million-dollar settlements. It was found in the lived experiences of travelers who once entered airports with shoulders hunched, eyes low, and anxiety simmering just beneath the surface. People who'd learned to shrink, to soften, to overcompensate, just to avoid suspicion. People who once accepted that unfairness was simply the cost of going from one place to another. But after Flight 267, they began to stand taller, because they saw what happened when injustice met resistance, when prejudice met power. But this time, power belonged to the truth, and the wings that had once protected Heather Langford. They couldn't stand against the weight of a police chief's badge. But the real victory was never about one woman overpowering another. It was about something far more meaningful. A system, for once, doing what it was built to do, holding power accountable, no matter where it comes from. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, comment below, because stories like this one don't just deserve to be told. They deserve to change the world.